Hello, everyone, and welcome to Manufacturing Matters, where we talk about the technology and trends that are reshaping the global manufacturing industry. My name is Winn Hardin. I'll be your host today, and I'm with my co-host, Jimmy Carroll. How you doing, Jimmy?
Doing well, thanks. Very excited.
I am too, because today we're lucky enough to have Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, U.S. Representative for Virginia's 4th Congressional District, and one of the co-authors of the National Commission on Robotics Act. And I know that's an act that's very, very important to a lot of our audience members out there. So, Representative, thank you so much for taking time today to join us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So for those who don't know, for anyone listening, and I know that a lot of folks probably do, but just a little background is the National Commission on Robotics Act, which is HR 7334, was introduced in February by bipartisan House lawmakers with the goal of establishing an 18-member commission on American leadership in robotics. This commission will assess U.S. competitiveness, workforce needs, and supply chain security in robotics to provide actionable policy recommendations within 2 years. And I know that, from a lot of discussions and presentations and roundtables at, for example, the most recent A3 Business Forum, that this is something that's going to be very welcome in the industry. So thank you. With that, I would just want to start by asking where you see the U.S. position in robotics AI today versus the rest of the world.
So on the one hand, I think we have some of the best innovators, some of the best industry leaders, and robotics is really integrated in across industry sectors, just about every industry sector. Mm-hmm. And we are a world leader, but we're not the world leader. And to give you some statistics on that, the U.S. robotics sector is estimated to bring about $50 billion in economic value. That's pretty good. But China accounts for 54% of all robotics installations worldwide, compared to only 9% for the United States. So while we have some of the brightest and the best, we don't have enough. So we've got to make sure that we are catching up to China and being really a global leader.
Representative, I'd like to follow up with, why is this the perfect time to do that? In our circles, where we deal with, the FANUCs, Universal Robotics, the major players, the U.S. is known for having some of the best robotic technology on the planet. Most of the advanced work cells, at least up until very recent time, that were going to be shipped around to multinational facilities around the world, were constructed or designed here in the U.S., but then they would be shipped overseas. And now it seems to be a lot of the discussion is about the economics of fielding robotic solutions. But for you, what was the tipping point that made you decide, all right, now it's time to get busy about the NCRA?
A couple of things. I have now been in government and policymaker for 20 years, first at the state level for almost 18, and now at Congress. And I also worked in the private sector. And one of my biggest complaints with public policy is we're too reactive. Mm-hmm. And because technology now changes so rapidly, if you're reactive, by the time you have a policy in place, it's outdated. Yeah. And so we really needed to make sure we weren't continuing to get behind the curveball from a technology perspective, and then therefore completely being left behind. The AI revolution has really made the changes in technology a lot faster. If you just think about how fast, whether it's computing, whether it's algorithms, AI itself, how much has changed in just a year. Yeah. I think if we don't start now, we're already behind, and if we don't start now, we'll never catch up.
Just thinking, as far as this national robotics strategy, what, in your opinion, are the key takeaways or pillars, and how could the bill help the U.S. become the global leader in automation? So
I think any policy that comes out of this commission really needs to focus on workforce, because one of the downsides to how fast technology changes is your workforce is not prepared. And you are constantly having to play catch up with getting enough of a workforce. And even though robotics is going to, in some instances, displace human workers, it's just going to change the jobs. I think most automations you saw, it just shifts what human beings are doing. And yet, if you're just relying on whether it's the K-12 system, whether it's the higher education system, our technical schools, our community colleges, if you're only relying on them and not looking at workforce retraining, reskilling, or helping to teach adaptability, particularly among young people, then you're always going to be, again, behind the curveball in developing your workforce. So I think that's the first really critical component that any policy needs to have. And then I think you need to make sure that, particularly when you combine robotics and AI, you need to make sure that the policies that you have in place around things like ethics, or depending on what the robots are doing, um, you know, holding robots accountable, which I know sounds crazy, but
Not if it
you
falls on
see
you.
behind me, kind of, my spot doll. And so that I spend a lot of time watching science fiction. But science fiction sometimes is based on a kernel of fact. And I think what really has helped inform part of my opinion around this is sitting in an energy subcommittee talking to some of the AI CEOs. And I kind of made a joke. I was like, so basically we have to worry about, the age of Ultron. And he said, yeah. So I think we need to ensure that whether it's ensuring that, you know, robotics and AI that are used in communications or in healthcare, that the same sort of ethical and, compact between industries and patients, or industries and customers, or industries and workers, industries and communities, that basic social compact remains intact. And so I think because robots aren't going to replace people completely,
Right.
they're going to work alongside each other, and there are going to be some issues that we're going to have to work through, especially when you start to see robots have learned, and artificial intelligence, they've learned how to deceive. So we got to put some guardrails around how they're used and how they interact with human beings from a safety perspective, and from a protection, consumer protection or environmental protection perspective.
Yeah. First of all, I love the fact that you focus on workforce training or almost retraining, because I think between robotics, AI, and the new iterations of technology are coming out, there's obviously going to be some serious evolution of not just of our day-to-day operations, but how we make our livings and how we go about it. So, the thought that we need more technicians and engineers, doesn't have to be a full-blown engineer to run robotics. That's the great thing about the new robot systems that are out there, is that they can be operated by virtually anyone with a little bit of training. So. It's nice to know that by focusing on retraining, we'll also be helping to ease this transition to this new world that we're going.
Yeah. And the one other thing I forgot to mention, and I should have mentioned, is also making sure that we don't end up with supply chain issues, that we have a robust supply chain that continues to be available throughout the process for either manufacturing, operation, maintenance, and so forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's interesting that, it almost seems like between robots and AI, traditional robots they're fixed, or maybe they're on a pedestal and they're moving around, but it's relatively simple tasks. But when you put robotics and AI together, I think you really get into those ethical concerns questions you were talking about.
And safety, yes.
100%. And although if you're in an industrial space, robotic safety has always been a concern. Employee safety is always paramount worry and concern. But when you put autonomy back together with that super strong piece of equipment, then it's a whole different ball game. To the point that you're smartly addressing both robotics and AI. What do you think the makeup of this national commission could be? And if I could just throw in a secondary question on that, I know you're going through a 1 to 2 year period, right, for an initial plan and then a 2-year plan. When do you hope to have some actionable guidelines or guidance for the rest of the market?
As soon as possible. It'll take a while for it to stand up and meet and begin to have those discussions. So, hopefully, a year at minimum.
Okay.
And I think, sort of a cross section of stakeholders and experts. So both on the supply side and the demand side, sort of, the industries that need the robotics and the AI and those that manufacture.
Right.
But I also think having, education stakeholders who can help with the workforce development, logistic experts. We just want to make sure any stakeholder that could be touched by a robotics policy has a seat at that table.
Awesome.
What do you see? What do you see as the next steps after the commission's report is complete?
We implement it. So we implement it as quickly as possible. I mean, I really, and we revisit it because, here's my other complaint about Congress is we will pass legislation, we will pass a policy, and then we'll be like, oh, we're done.
Right.
And so I think that this commission can help us do what I'm about to say is we're going to need to revisit that policy very frequently, very often. We can't wait. Typically around here, you pass a bill to develop some policy. It has a sunset period that could be anywhere 5 to 10 years, and then you come back and revisit it, and that's too long. Because like I said, technology is changing and moving so quickly. The policies that the commission recommends in, let's say, 2028 could be outdated by 2030. And so we want to make sure, I'd like to see this commission in an advisory capacity, not just if we put this in a federal agency, but that the commission in an advisory capacity keep bringing its expertise that's not quite as bogged down with the legislative process the way Congress is.
So I want to back up a quick second. When we were talking about, what are you going to do after we get the findings of the report, and implement it is always the best answer. Actions are better than words. Do you see the majority of these changes coming at the regulatory level, federal level, in terms of kind of evening the playing field against other regions of the world where government and industry may have a more integrated approach, shall we say?
It could be. I suspect that they'll have recommendations at the federal, state, and local level, right. Particularly states, because to the extent your robotics policy sort of touches on energy policy or economic development or siting or zoning or anything like that, I think you're going to have a partnership, with a state or local government. Yeah. But I would presume, and they could have best practices to give to the states. They could have best practices for industry. They could have best practices for apprenticeship programs, for K-12 education and recommendations. So I do think that I envision that it would have a wide variety of recommendations that could touch federal, state, local, private sector, in the private sector.
That seems to me to be one of the most daunting challenges of what the NCRA is trying to accomplish, because you mentioned energy sectors. I mean, there's information security sectors, banking sectors, healthcare. There's virtually no industry extent.
Broadband, broadband, telecom,
right. That won't be impacted by robotics, AI, or the combination thereof. So I hope it's a really big table so you can bring in a whole lot of people to get a lot of insights and guidance on that.
Hey everybody, I just want to take a quick second and thank our sponsor. Manufacturing Matters is sponsored by Tech B2B Marketing. They're a full-service public relations and marketing agency that focuses on technology companies, especially in the energy and automation markets. They provide full-service media relations, investor relations, employee relations, full end-to-end content development, video services, animation, full IT stack development from website integrating with ERP systems, CRM, marketing automation systems, and they bring a whole lot of knowledge and experience about technical markets since they've been servicing those markets for over 30 years. So if you have any questions, you want to learn more, go to techb2b.com, and now let's get back to the show.
Yeah.
So I know we were already talking about the importance of workforce retraining to get more technicians so that we can build on our position in the robotics and the AI industry. But I don't know that we've had a moment for you to share with us your thoughts about the importance of robotics and AI to the U.S. manufacturing industry. Do you see this as, what are you thinking?
I mean, critically important, not just manufacturing, but, distribution. So last week I visited a Niagara bottling facility. So Niagara, it's not just the Niagara water, but pretty much every bottled water that you drink that comes in the really thin bottles those bottles are manufactured and it's poured at a Niagara bottling facility. And part of what I saw were the robots that they use to take the bottles from the bottling machinery and
Yeah.
equipment to
Right.
pallets, and then the pallets packing them all up and then putting them in the truck. It is all done by robots that are very highly sophisticated, that have sensors everywhere, that are very sensitive. And I watched them in action, and I watched how when they go to the truck bay, they, they're sensitive enough to know, is there a person in here?
Mhm.
Is there, is this uneven? And they do some of the work that they do, it wouldn't be safe for a person to do.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is, increasing safety, but they're much more efficient than human beings. And that facility used to be the fastest bottling facility in the world for Niagara. Now they're number 2. But a lot of that is because of the robotics. So I think whether it's efficiencies, whether it's safety, are the 2 biggest things. And then just logistically, there are places you can't send human beings. That it's just safer to send robotics. So I've seen that, I have an Amazon distribution center, and I've seen both the robots the little ones that kind of remind you of the little robots in Star Wars that are zooming around the
Little
Death
toaster
Star,
sized
but
ones. Yeah.
yeah, but they're big enough to put small packages on, and they zip through. And then the big robots that are sort of helping to put goods in packages. And again, they didn't displace people, but the people are now doing different things and helping to keep those robots running and checking the logistics and the supply chain, and keeping them on track. So that has helped improve efficiency.
Yeah.
And in today's society, and I have a teen and a tween, so I know this is just going to get worse with future generations. They're used to getting stuff immediately. They don't want to wait. And so meeting, whether it's consumer goods, meeting demand, whether it's, making sure you're getting bottled water very quickly out into the world, especially in a natural disaster, whether it's responding in a natural disaster using, they're not technically robots, but some drones can be operated robotically. Making sure that robots are working with humans to get the most efficiency, the most productivity, in a way that's safe and in a way that benefits the community rather than overburdening the community, I think is critically important.
Absolutely. And there's a ton of search and rescue robots actually that are out there. I mean, our good friends over at Boston Robotics, and everyone knows Spot, and that's one of his early applications was that very thing. And what you were speaking about makes me think of the old slogan we use here in the robotics industry all the time, which is robots take dull, dirty, and dangerous work away from humans. And then put on top of that, up until I think the last time I looked at the stats was somewhere around a year or so, maybe a year and a half ago, BLS was predicting up to like 20% openings in certain key manufacturing industries like welding or assembly, other jobs that we've traditionally had a difficult time getting young folks to go into. Although I know there's a lot of efforts and a lot of great groups out there trying to engage and bring robotics and what we call motion control and AI and imaging systems, into the K-12 that you were talking about earlier. So I wish there was a robotics club when I was growing up in high school, because the couple I've been to are pretty cool.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked, there's also the applications for healthcare and
Yeah.
the precision with which robotics can be used, um particularly for very small, whether it's capillaries or something, like
Yeah.
the precision that a robot can use as
Mhm.
opposed to a person, but guided by a person, of course,
Yeah.
is also critically important as well.
Absolutely. As a guy who's had a couple of knee surgeries, I can vouch for that. Robotic surgery.
Yeah.
Robotic surgery works pretty good.
Yeah. In rural areas, once they get their infrastructure in place, that's critically important um where you have a lot of workforce shortages, and you can use robots to fill in those gaps.
Absolutely, especially when you consider that there's all kinds of healthcare challenges about servicing the rural American areas, and the difficulties and economics that are involved with that. So you can, it's wonderful when you. One of the nicest things is funny because I started my business. I started my career being more in the defense analyst industry,
Mhm.
and it was so much more fun. I enjoyed talking about building things and companies that help make the world a better place than just blowing up. Not that defense doesn't have a place; it certainly does, and I'm a huge fan of keeping America safe. But it is nice when we see these technologies that can impact so many people's lives in so many different ways for the better.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
exciting. My little
Mhm.
corner of the world.
Well, if you look not too long ago, right, like during COVID, a lot of e-commerce stores or e-commerce operations, they have what you call peak season, around the holidays when there's a lot of orders and production and throughput has to ramp up. But I think COVID sort of not and I don't want to spin it in a positive way, right? But I think a lot of people realize like this is kind of the path forward. Like e-commerce
Yeah.
is going to be something that's not going away, and we need to embrace automation now.
Yeah.
Or like you said,
I would frame it as COVID accelerated a trend that was already happening.
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah.
Especially in like food processing and productivity.
Yeah.
Certain industries that were laggards now really had to step up at that time, and I think
Exactly.
we're all benefiting that. As a matter of fact, I think the general guidance right now is 26. Food is still supposed to be a hot market for automation uptake, and it traditionally hasn't been a great place there.
Yeah.
We've talked, and when you mentioned it, and Representative McClellan, you mentioned it in terms of like these robots having different safety features to be able to detect certain things and recognize a person against whatever, a forklift, whatever it might be, and AI plays into to that quite a bit. And I know that the commission here is on robotics, but obviously AI is a part of that. And we spoke not long ago to the president of the National Association of Manufacturers, Jay Timmons.
Mhm.
And we discussed a research project at the NAM that the NAM worked on with members of Congress and the AI-powered factory of the future. And
Mhm.
in our discussion, he said there's a lot of people who talk about AI, including a lot of members of Congress, that don't necessarily understand AI and how it can make us competitive and how to harness it. And in that discussion, Jay ultimately said that there's going to be a lot of leaders that emerge and that policymakers can help shape how AI is approached in this country. And so I thought, that was really insightful and interesting to hear. Could you give us your thoughts on AI specifically today and how that fits into a robotic strategy? And second part of that is ultimately how it helps strengthen the U.S. economy.
Yeah. I think with AI, the beauty of it is adaptive learning. And so in real time, it can, whether it's figuring out how can I make this more efficient, or um, what I'm doing right now might not be meeting the need. So let me try again, real time. What are my lessons learned real time, in a way that is so much faster to process than a human being.
Yeah.
So that is going to lead innovation, and frankly, lead innovation and changes in technology and making it even more rapid. Um, I think, and this goes back to sort of how what I mentioned earlier, like any tool, though, AI can bring extraordinary benefits, but like any tool, it can also be weaponized. It can also um, bring challenges that we can't anticipate.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that I think Congress plays a role in helping to figure out those guardrails around how do we ensure whether it's ensuring that an algorithm has a diversity of data so that it's not sort of unwittingly, lack of a better word,
Yeah.
inserting bias into something, or how do we make sure that, again, going back to that hearing I went to, the CEO also said we have to make sure that human beings control AI and not the other way around.
Right.
That's the CEO of an AI manufacturing company saying that. So, and I do believe we're not prepared to think through what that means, but we need to be. And I think Congress sort of helps play a role, and this commission can help play a role in thinking through what those policies are going to look like.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. When you think about the complexities, I mean, you mentioned earlier, we're all Star Trek fans here, trying to implement the 3 laws into this technology that we have now, where we're about to have autonomous robots in the not too distant future, is an incredible technical challenge. And at the same time, I mean, when you look back through history, whether when it was employee safety after the initial industrial revolution, we needed Congress, we needed the U.S. government from a stop, and for states too, state governments also, to help provide that top-down guidance to a certain extent. It's a little Wild West out here right now as well.
And I think for 2 reasons. I mean, I believe in the goodness of human nature, but history has taught that sometimes the worst impulses of human nature take over. Well, it's human beings who are creating and programming these, AI, and AI is learning from human beings.
Yeah.
So it is not beyond the realm of possibility that they pick up the worst parts of human nature. And just like we need to regulate human behavior, and that's what government is for, is, I believe in capitalism, but I also believe left to its own devices, capitalism will not do the right thing is from a human perspective, from a community perspective, from a social contract perspective. And history has taught us that. And so that's where, just like government plays that role with human beings, I think government needs to play that role with machines. And AI in particular, robotics to a certain extent, definitely, but AI in particular, if we're not careful, we'll use up our natural resources much faster than any industrial revolution. I mean, I don't know if we're in the 4th or the 5th now. I think we might be 5th or 6th. But every industrial revolution left to its own devices, you run the risk of eating up the world's resources. And I tell some of my colleagues all the time, it does, from a national security perspective, from a humanity perspective, it does no good if we win the AI race with China. And yet in the process, we've created more uninhabitable land, or we have caused food shortages, or we have caused energy shortages or water shortages. And so, or we have priced energy and water and access and housing out of reach for consumers because land, and this is a real example I read in the paper this morning, the paper, that's so quaint, it was online. But you see land selling at $6 million an acre to put a data center on it, pushing people out who cannot afford housing there anymore.
Right.
And if we're not careful with finding that balance, then we might win the AI race and destroy our communities and our planet and our society in the process.
Right. Yeah. With great power always comes great danger. And it's the definition of a Pyrrhic victory, right?
Yeah.
Be careful what you wish for. Another
That's right.
infamous Chinese saying that always holds more true, right?
Yep.
That and beware to live in interesting times. And we certainly live in interesting times, right?
We definitely live in interesting times.
Congresswoman, before we let you go, and I really appreciate, again, you sharing your time with us and your attention and your knowledge, is there one takeaway that you would want folks out there, especially in the robotics and the AI industry, to know about NCRA and what you hope it'll do for them?
I hope that it will bring all of the critical stakeholders and experts together to be proactive in an ongoing way in developing policies for harnessing and getting the best use out of robotics and eventually AI in a way that helps our humanity, that helps our communities, that helps our economy, and finds that balance that I just talked about. And I think this, by bringing, the problem with policymakers sometimes and members of Congress is we're not experts, and we forget to bring experts to the table in a way that is meaningful. And this commission will allow us to do that specifically for robotics and AI on an ongoing basis.
Well, for the whole industry at large, let me say thank you. When are you guys kicking off the main effort in terms of the formation of the commission and so forth?
Well, bills got passed first.
Yep. Okay.
But it has been filed. It's ready to go. Hopefully we'll pass it soon.
Awesome.
If there are folks out there that feel like they can lend an opinion or would like to reach out otherwise with questions or thoughts, what's the best way for them to do that?
So if you want to reach out to me directly, you can, if you just go to mcclellan.house.gov, it'll tell you all the ways to get in touch or follow the work that I'm doing. And every member of Congress, that's basically, it's their last name, .house.gov on this side. And I think making sure that the Energy and Commerce Committee staff, both Democrats and Republicans, the chair and the ranking member, that they hear from you, and that you're calling your member of Congress and saying this is important. This bill is important. This commission is important to our industry, to the future of how we can use robotics across industries, and make your voice heard that this is a priority for you.
Well, I would very much encourage everybody to do that, like Congresswoman McClellan said. And if anybody has any questions or thoughts, we'd be happy to pass them along to her office. And everyone who's listened or tuned in, we really appreciate it. If you have those questions or thoughts, reach out at manufacturing-matters.com. And Congresswoman McClellan, thank you again once more. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.